This video is the second in a 3-part series. If you haven't already, I recommend you watch my video on the previous game first, and keep in mind that I'll be spoiling both games here. As a sequel to the first game, Super Dangan Ronpa 2 carries over many of the elements that make the franchise good, while tweaking a number of gameplay elements, sometimes for the better and sometimes for the worse. In fact, the general approach Dangan Ronpa 2 seems to have in regards to the prequel is that of a response. I wouldn't say it's deconstructive or subversive in regards to the first game, as if I know what that even means. But despite a complete change in cast, it's very much expected that the player has played the first game. By response, I mean that there are a number of elements to the design made to reflect on those of the first game. For instance, the cast has a lucky student voiced by Megumi Ogata. There is a huge muscle-bound character who regularly interacts with a large-breasted tan-skinned athlete, a girl with a foreign name, a dumbass, a mascot voiced by an iconic character, a chuny, a student whose talent is unknown, and a few other trends across both games. These lines aren't straight, but the reason for that becomes clearer once the purpose is realized, and that is subversion of expectation. All genres thrive on at least some degree of this, but mystery more heavily relies on it. A work that's predictable can still be engaging, but a mystery that's predictable has much less of a chance to do so. By seeming to create trends, following up on some of them, and subverting others, Super Dangan Ronpa 2 is able to more easily play with your expectations, keeping you guessing as to what it might or might not do based on what you know from the previous game. Though if I had to boil down what I'm going to be focusing on in this video, it will be characters, as most of the rest remains as solid as ever. The excellent voice cast continues with performances such as Minami Takayama, Ai Kayano, and Tomokazu Sugita. The new music is great, the reaction system is gone, and the gameplay has had a few other changes for the better. Things like the ability to agree with the other characters instead of merely shooting down arguments, the new final strike to the BTB replacement, and the series of questions run through in the logic dive all transform how you use evidence bullets or discard them entirely, which allows the writers more freedom to advance the story without running into awkward traps like the e-handbook in the third trial of the previous game. For example, the true culprit of the first trial would have been far more suspicious had the meat on the bone been an evidence bullet. The Rebuttal Showdown is also a nice addition, gamifying a one-on-one debate with you. Wait, seriously? Cutting through arguments, shooting down arguments, are these all puns in the Japanese too, or what? It's just too perfect. The new Hangman's Gambit is absolute hell though. You're required to carefully pick the letters you need to form the phrase to continue, but you're also punished for not paying attention to the letters you don't need, which makes the gameplay far more hectic. And in the latter half of the game, it's downright unfair. What the fuck is this shit? But gameplay isn't what I want to focus on, so... Wait, that was about everything already. Fuck it. The Nanami minigame controls like shit while also being tedious and boring. Island mode is still the best way to go through the free times, but mediocre otherwise. But those free times themselves are more rewarding than ever, since the cast of DR2 is overall a strong step above that of the first game. The strong character designs are carried over as well. Hinata, the protagonist, is on the plain side like Nagi from the first game, but his more stiff clothing choices highlight his seriousness. Nagi went to Hope's Peak because he could and would have probably been satisfied with anything, so he dresses more casually. While for Hinata it's been his dream to go, so naturally he dresses the part. Also, there's a curious aspect to his eyes. Most of the eyes in the franchise look similar aside from color, but there are a few exceptions. Pekko's are a more intense shade of red, which matches her capability for killing intent as a Yakuza bodyguard. Ishimaru's resemble bullseyes, hinting at the direct, targeted, and forceful nature that his position requires. Hinata, however, lacking any true skills of his own, has a clear slash to his eyes, as if to nullify the idea of him being talented enough to truly enter Hope's Peak. While Hinata contrasts Nagi, Komaida's design deliberately reflects him. Both have a hoodie as part of their more casual outfit, but I also like the engaging colors in Komaida's design. The green, red, black, and white create a full contrast which fits Komaida, who is so intent on conflict, specifically that between hope and despair, referencing the first game indirectly. Directly referencing the first game, the imposter Togami's design is such a simple change, but knowing how generally serious Togami was in the first game and seeing Fat Togami here with much the same demeanor is just infinitely funny to me. The way the character art transforms the purpose of the pose is just perfect. Akane also fulfills the reference to the first game, having a similar color palette to Asahina but without the color blue. Given that Asahina is a swimmer, a close association with blue is reasonable, but considering how intense Akane is, it also signifies to me a lack of calm. Nidai doesn't have much similarity or dissimilarity to Ogami, but this guy is just dripping with intensity. Just look at his shadow! His border is made to look rough and jagged, he's got lightning arcing off of his fucking eyes, his whistle is held up by a chain instead of a piddly little string, it's nuts! And contrasting all this eccentricity is Koizumi. It's telling when her design stands out because of how refreshingly normal it is. She doesn't have an intense hairstyle like Hinata or Nagi, and it's hard to say Fukawa looks normal when half the time she looks like this. Best girl, best girl! But who's worst girl? It's not Saionji, somehow, but she's still pretty weak. She's a brat, but most of her shortcomings come from the fact that she died before she could get the proper character arc that she seemed to be going into, and her free times aren't good enough to flesh her out. Ibuki is far more enjoyable thanks to her boundless energy and Ami Koshimizu's voice performance. Plus, the fact that her character references K-On! Is hilarious. But beyond being a quirky musician who left her previous band, her free times fail to say much about her and she dies before she gets much limelight. There are a few other characters who I think weren't handled as well as they could have been, but considering how big the cast is, the fact that I like just about all of them is noteworthy, but a few stand above. Kuzuryu is a bit comparable to Togami in that he starts out a dick and becomes nicer, but the way his arc is handled is more direct but more fulfilling. He actually commits an even worse crime than Togami's body manipulation, as his actions result directly in Koizumi's death, but he takes such a strong stance to earn back that trust in slitting his own stomach while still recovering from previous wounds that it's hard not to find him endearing. And that's without mentioning his whole deal as a baby-faced gangster. The violent, angry remarks coming from a guy who's so small and strangely cute is just perfect, and that's excluding his amusing adherence to laws. Speaking of perfection, Koizumi is so earnest and honest. She's harsh on guys, but she just wants to help them strive to be better people who can rely on themselves, even though she's willing to offer help whenever possible. Considering that they're some of my favorites, I think it goes without saying that I'm a big fan of the Chapter 2 killing. In my replay, I found the climax to be genuinely emotional. With many of the murders in the first game, the culprit chose their victim based on opportunity, like Leon killing Maizona after fending off her attack, or Celestia using Yamada before discarding him. The previous murder was also like this, but the Chapter 2 murder is both more personal and less immediate, as Kuzuryu and Koizumi have a conversation before she's killed by Peko. Kuzuryu, having lost his sister and killed her murderer in the collective memory gap, finds out that Koizumi hid evidence related to the crime he took vengeance on. When she finds out, though she doesn't remember what happened, she tries to talk with those who were involved and make things right. That honesty and compassion she's capable of make Kuzuryu hesitant to do anything immediately, since for all his anger he's not as bullheaded as his accessories might imply. But she pisses him off, prompting Peko to step in and act in his place, knowing that the likelihood of their crime being revealed was high, sacrificing herself for his sake. She also tries to claim she isn't a person as much as she is a weapon of Kuzuryu's, which pulls out an emotional goodbye before her execution in which she dies protecting Kuzuryu just like she killed to protect him, and oh god. It took some work to do, but making the case more personal made it that much stronger on a character level. Between Koizumi's accountability and covering up the murder of Kuzuryu's sister, Peko's proclamation of her lack of accountability, all under the control of Monokuma's rules, it's not like those previous killings where I simply understand why the killer did what they did. Here I legit think both sides are right and wrong, and the fact that the case was charged with so much character and conflict made it better for it. The fourth murder from the first game was the best for similar reasons, but the gap is wider because the characters involved in that killing from the first game just aren't as good. But while the Chapter 2 murder is good, it's only my second favorite case from DR2. My favorite, of course, is the one everyone loves, but before I talk about that, the first one needs mention. It's a solidly constructed case and a far better introduction than the first game, as it manages to somehow both be relatively easy to work through the clues while introducing more mechanics at a quicker pace than the first game. Yet it still manages to keep its bigger twists and secrets until the ideal moment. But what really helps it reach above any murder from the first game is this one scene. After going through the evidence, it's become apparent that Komaeda has had some sort of involvement, even though up to this point he's been overall positive and, well, hopeful. As he's accused, he seems to be on the cusp of breaking down, but then... Let me take a moment to break down what it is about this scene that I love so goddamn much. Part of this is that subversion of expectation. The one accused freaking out is typical for a very good reason. By the nature of the game, if you are voted as the culprit, you're dead whether the guess is correct or not. Being accused of the murder should rightfully be worrying in these circumstances, but Komaeda's response doesn't fit that mold at all. It makes no sense logically, but here he is having the time of his life. And I can't understate how much I love that cackle enough. Megumi Ogata is great in general, but her harsh, wheezy performance as Komaeda is possibly my favorite voice work from her yet, and it goes a long way in selling his deep love and passion for hope and talent. That and the tense music hitting at just the right moment makes it all the more impactful. But I think what makes this scene all the better for me is that cathartic release. I don't recall my initial reaction upon seeing the scene, but at this point I've accepted that Komaeda is not just my favorite character in Dangan Ronpa, but one of my favorite characters ever. This scene is not just the reveal of his true personality, it's the start of the great moments that come from him later. And it's not exactly quick to get from the start of the game to here. From the prologue to this point in the trial, it's a good 3 to 4 hours. 3 to 4 hours Komaeda spends staying reserved on his true feelings before this bombastic reveal. That element is what pushes the first trial to join the second and fifth above any of the ones in the first game for me. When I say that Super Dangan Ronpa 2 is a response to the first game, Komaeda is a big part of that, as he is used to reflect on its themes. The way he talks of hope overcoming despair is a blatant reference to the conflict of the first game, but in truth he vehemently disagrees with the overall message of that conflict. The things Naegi uses to defeat Enoshima have nothing to do with the luck he was accepted to the academy for, but despite also being lucky, Komaeda has no love for those who aren't deserving students of Hope's Peak. If you're not meant to be successful, you're just a stepping stone. But this madness manifests in him believing himself to be a stepping stone as well, more than willing to die so that one of the others might kill him and lead to more conflict, believing that the only worthwhile good is the one that overcomes the greatest ordeal. He's so faithful in this idea that he's willing to fight on the side of despair to make that goodness brighter. If the personal motive is what made Chapter 2's killing grade, then this too is what works for Chapter 5, as Komaeda constructs a murder mystery that stands above the others in the franchise and how multi-layered it is. It's a luck-assisted suicide made to look like an actual suicide that was made to look like a murder. In fact, if it were not for his luck, it would be unsolvable, which uses the setting excellently, as it's a murder that can't have been done outside the world of Dangan Ronpa. His bizarre motivations result in actions that only make sense in this world, and that combined with the conceptual idea of an antagonist who wants the protagonist to succeed over him is a huge part of why I like Komaeda. He's not the most complex character, in fact he is very upfront about his motives and desires, but that doesn't take away from how enjoyable he is to watch. But what fascinates me about his ideals is that he actually exemplifies the very thing he fights against. Not in despair, but in talent. When he finds out Hinata is untalented, he goes straight into treating him like garbage. Though he works against him half the time, he is by a good order of magnitude better than the rest of the cast in the field of mutual killings. He solves most of the murders on his own, teasing the others with questions to draw the truth out, refusing to do all the work himself. Except in one scene after he's learned about how the other characters became evil and rushes through the closing argument, complete with the soundtrack. And while he feels his luck is a worthless talent since he never worked to obtain it, the fact is he utilizes it so masterfully I'm not sure if I agree with him there. Nagi has his luck, but he never purposefully utilized it, but Komaeda understands his inner workings and abuses his chain of bad and good luck for his benefit. I mentioned my essay on luck in Danganronpa in my previous video, and at the end of the essay I was a bit confused about the incident in the final dead room where Komaeda started a chain of good and bad luck without starting it on an unlucky note. But replaying it, I noticed that Komaeda was very much aware of this. Though he pulls the trigger with no hesitance, it's not because he's confident in the form his luck typically takes. He mentions the 1 in 6 chance of survival specifically rather than the guarantee his talent normally offers in the right situation. Even though he has such a high chance of death, he still doesn't hesitate because he's so certain of his ideals that whether he lives or not, no matter the situation, he believes that the best outcome would be reached eventually. Russian roulette, brain cancer, a killing game, even his own luck-assisted suicide. How can I not love such pure dedication? While most of the characters hate Komaeda, there is something of an exception in Hinata, who Komaeda acts as a foil to. Komaeda notes that Hinata is similar to them in that they both admire the talents accepted to Hope's Peak. Hinata wanted to go there so badly that when he finds out he's on some island paradise instead of Hope's Peak, he refuses to accept it until the last possible minute. What Hinata most wants is to be recognized for greatness, to the point that he allows himself to go through the surgery to become the paragon of talent that is Kamakura at the cost of losing his previous sense of self. Hinata says over and over again that he's not like Komaeda, but then it turns out that he too sacrificed himself for what was thought to be his greatest hope. Even as he says he can't understand Komaeda, Hinata understands him better than anyone. After everyone finds out that Hinata is a regular reserve corps student rather than one of the specially talented students destined for the main course, the only people who care about this are Hinata and Komaeda. Every time the group comes to a conclusion, Hinata is the one insisting that if Komaeda were alive, he'd be laughing at them and teasing them so that they could dig deeper to find the truth. This purity, intelligence, and drive have nothing to do with the fact that he's lucky, and though he's beyond what a normal person might be, he still believes himself to be of the same normal trash as anyone. Yet he himself is evidence to the idea that a normal person can still be successful without a special talent. Though under all those ideals, he still wants to be someone special, he just doesn't believe he can do it in life, sacrificing himself to extinguish his most hated enemy. Although his feelings and hope are meant to echo Nagi, in being the smartest character present, Komaeda fills a role similar to Kirigiri. Though while Kirigiri hides evidence because she fulfills the dramatic role of a fictional detective, Komaeda did so to make the others struggle more so that they might become stronger. But Komaeda isn't the only character in Kirigiri's role, which brings me to Nanami, and there's one thing I need to make perfectly clear. I hate Chiaki Nanami. She's the worst thing about Danganronpa 2 without question, and that's important to know because yes, Enoshima is still in the game and she's as bad as ever, but Nanami is still worse. What I find interesting about this is that she's a counterpart to Komaeda in a way. While he is the intelligent antagonist, she's the intelligent protagonist, filling a role closer to Kirigiri's and keeping the trials going. In a way, my favorite character from the first game was split into one character I find absolutely brilliant and one I can't fucking stand. To really get at the heart of why I don't like Nanami, I have to get at her heart. Which is easier said than done because she's an artificial intelligence who has no soul. The game tries to sell her as being compassionate but can't seem to make up its mind on how she feels. She has a clear lack of reaction to most everything going on, including the murders. When she sees Koizumi dead, she claims that murder is a crime that cannot be forgiven. But when she sees the body, her first reaction is to ask the others not to disturb the evidence rather than actually feel something about her death. Then later, while examining the room with Hinata, she's making jokes about dirty magazines? What the fuck? I could understand the bit about the evidence if it were coming from Kirigiri. She doesn't tend to have strong reactions toward the discovered bodies, and she's not self-righteous about bringing killers to justice. She does her best to remain objective, so it's expected of her to focus on evidence first, and the others find her casual treatment of the bodies to be cold and distant as she tends to be. This would also be more fitting for Komaeda, though he'd be more likely to hide his discoveries, and in fact he does. But many of my problems with Nanami lie in the fact that she's so unfitting for the role in the story she's been given with no self-awareness about it. Her personality boils down to nice with a few quirks here or there, but her flaws are non-existent. Or rather, things like her tendency to fall asleep, slow reactions, and general clumsiness are all there to make her seem more adorable, like someone the audience might want to protect. She should be a useless moe blob, yet the narrative then turns around and tries to have her direct the other characters into trials. That is, until she can't get a word in for whatever reason and big manly Hinata has to come in and explain what she's trying to get across. See, when Kirigiri or Komaeda avoid saying something important or does so in a cryptic way, it happens for meaningful character reasons. But Nanami is trying just as hard as the others to keep everyone from dying, and watching her fail to do so while the game insists that she's a strong character for trying is downright infuriating. Kirigiri is a strong female character. She's cool and I like her. Nanami seems like she should be, but she isn't. But what makes her absolutely insufferable to me is how the game refuses to stop treating her with this gross adoration, shoving her and the fact that everyone loves her in my face at every turn. Saionji calls Sumiki a nasty, trashy pig shit slut all the time. She calls Nanami a slowpoke gamer girl. Wow, that cuts so deep. Gonna need a burn, heal. Oh, and the fact that she's a super high school level gamer is so blatantly pandering. She was designed to be as appealing to the average player as possible, so to get that across, since everyone playing Super Dangan Ronpa 2 would be the type of person who plays games, they made her a person who plays games. She's also voiced by a popular voice actress, but while Kana Hanazawa is pretty cool, her performance as Nanami is just dull. Though it's not like there's much to work with here, and it's not her fault she gets typecast into these sleepy characters. She's in half the unique event CGs even when she has no reason to be there. Oh, you can play the triangle, get the fuck out of here! I can't even feel satisfied when she turned out to be the killer in Chapter 5. Not only is she the only one to get a unique CG while going to her death, as if it weren't already so obvious that the development team has a gross, throbbing erection for her, she's only in that position because she so nobly chose to sacrifice herself for the sake of the others. No other killer was in a position where they could possibly win, but here she practically has to beg them to choose her as the culprit because we can't have such a pure flower dying, guys. It's not fair. Isn't she so smart, pure, and strong-willed, guys? What pisses me off more is the execution. No other character escapes their fate, even for a moment. The executions go out of length to show how even strong characters like Peko, Gundam, Kirigiri, and Oat are completely at Monokuma's mercy. But Nanami escapes her initial fate and ends up in another one for no other reason than to show how she's such a strong female character, guys. Honest. I can't even find catharsis in her death since the soulless abomination doesn't bleed when crushed flat. But wait, there's more. Everyone's so depressed about her death that they literally do nothing for 2 days before the final trial, like the game isn't even worth playing without her. The fact that she's literally constructed to be like this in some way should be enough to keep me from outright disliking her. She's an AI placed alongside some of the worst villains of super high school level despair. It makes sense for her to be someone who's willing to accept about anyone and be kind to them because she's part of the therapeutic Neo World program meant to restore goodness to those once horribly broken people. Her talent as a gamer doesn't make sense, as there's nothing about her that explains how she became famous or renowned just by playing games a lot, but that doesn't matter because she's not real. But even putting aside the inherent contradiction of a strong moe character, the reason I can't find anything to like about Nanami is that there's no humanity in her whatsoever. Nothing negative ever comes from her, and she even manages to spin dying into a positive. She's always endlessly cute and optimistic and insightful, and no one ever tries to tear her down, so she's never challenged. She's impossible and boring. That said, it might be weird for me to point out how inhuman she is when she's an AI, and the series is full of weird, unrealistic characters, but while those characters are often exaggerated, they're extreme versions of very real ideas, with very human struggles and hang-ups. And even much beloved characters with artificial intelligence are given some element of humanity for us to relate to, even if it's simply that they're not human. We can relate to a robot going through an existential crisis about what it means to be alive, artificial or not, because we too are beings who consider the existential, wondering about our own creators, be it forces of nature or higher powers. And these questions bring interesting conflicts and moral dilemmas to a potentially uncomfortable forefront. Nanami has nothing. Without a backstory or conflict around the fact that there's nothing to her, she has no character. But she's a cute girl and it was sad when she died, and I guess that's enough for the fanbase to love her. I personally don't get it, and I probably never will, because as it stands, I honestly prefer Yamada as a character. That's not to say there aren't some other issues with the cast. I previously mentioned characters like Ibuki or Saionji and how their free times didn't flesh them out as much as I like, while they didn't get as much in the main game either. Akane and Soda, two characters who are fairly unpopular despite surviving the whole game, highlight a different problem. While the free times are generally enjoyable to go through, I just wish they could be incorporated into the main game somehow. Not only do you have characters like Sumiki and Idai who really come into their own with the free times, or characters like Kuzuryu and Komaeda who are already great characters made better with interesting free times, Akane and Soda have good free times but are mishandled poorly in the main game. Throughout the game, Akane is constantly eating or fighting, and her backstory brings up the harsh environment that made her this way, but her growth as a character comes too little too late. In Chapter 3, Nadai takes a bullet for her, and after he's healed by being turned into a robot, Akane gets in the exact same situation, throwing any conception of progress right out the window. Nadai needs to die twice for her to finally start getting it. But more obnoxious is Soda because it's such a minor thing that makes him so aggravating. He spends pretty much the whole game fawning over Sonya, hitting an obnoxious peak in Chapter 4. At this point, she's outright going against everything he's saying out of pure spite and making her interest in Gundam play in his day, and it makes the otherwise decent trial something of a chore to get through. But after he dies, Sota completely fails to give up and move on, and nothing comes of it. He chills out a bit, but Songye never really acknowledges him, or even brings up the fact that she's not giving him a definitive answer. The thread just lingers and ends up forgotten long after it becomes tiring. Their character arcs demand change, but it's not really tangible in the ways it should have been in the end. Which brings me to the overall thematic arc of Super Dangan Ronpa 2. As a response to Dangan Ronpa 1, it expands on one trend that was common in the characters from the first game in ways that the first game did not address. While the message of Dangan Ronpa 1 hinges on the willingness to brave the unknown outside of the safe space set of school, what it fails to address is those who aren't really fit for education. Dangan Ronpa 2 takes place on an island paradise, and a building resembling Hope's Peak sits in a state of ruin. The characters are still students, but upon finding out why and how they came into the professions they did, school is largely absent. This isn't untrue of the first game, but so many of the characters in the sequel don't just seem to exist beyond school, they're outright awkward in that environment. Gundam says that something that can talk is something that can betray you, and comes up with Chunibyo-isms to explain how he feels awkward about physical contact. Sota and Nidai were both awkward and nerdy before transforming themselves into what we see in-game. Even Hinata, who loves Hope's Peak above all else, tells Sumiki that he doesn't really like school that much. And Sumiki is someone who found her talent through being treated poorly in life, including at school. As she let herself be harassed constantly for fear of being ignored, she turned a desire to have power over others not into more bullying, but into caring for the weak and sickly. She made something out of her circumstances, but the fact that she's so broken doesn't really imply that the fact that her talent was discovered through school is a good thing. Ibuki forming a light music club and becoming famous from that also relates to school, but considering the game starts with her band having broken up is also not a good sign. The rest of the cast doesn't mention school a whole lot, but Hanamura, Koizumi, Kuzuryu, Peko, Sota, Sayonji, and Songye all have their talents coming from their upbringing, while Akane, Nidai, and the Imposter all discovered theirs on their own. If Danganronpa 1 was trying to send a message about the demeanor one needs to enter life after graduation, then Danganronpa 2 is about the dropouts. The climax has these characters forced to graduate by Enoshima, which will end the world, while Naegi, Kirigiri, and Togami argue that they should sacrifice themselves by avoiding graduation. Finishing school is culturally something of a necessity, as without even a high school diploma you're basically unemployable, and the work needed to get an equivalent takes a good deal of time. But the school system is by no means for everyone, and the Danganronpa 2 characters fill this role. None of them need school to be successful, and going to school during their gap in memories has Enoshima twisting their problems to her needs, driving them mad to the point that they use their boundless talent to help bring about the end of the world. Hinata, lacking in talent and desiring greatness, has no idea how to achieve this in the current system. His only choice is to go through it, and if school has a tragic tendency to drain the life out of those who go through it, then this idea is satirized as Hinata becomes a soulless Izuru Kamakura. He has everything one could want from Hope's Peak, but he's lost everything that made him who he was. But in the end, Hinata comes to accept who he is and that graduation isn't for him. Even though he might not have the skill to be in the limelight he wants, he realized that moving forward regardless is what's important. That's not to say school is unimportant. Naegi and the others keep saying Hinata and his friends should sacrifice themselves, but Hinata agrees because he doesn't see it as a sacrifice. Of course Naegi would though, since he is the type of person to get something from school, and that's what's important. School itself is only secondary to the things school is capable of giving, and if you can find a path in life, self-confidence, and education from school, then by all means it's worth your time. But not everyone will get those things from school, yet put themselves through it anyway. But there are more than just two options, and though that might be scary, making a choice that fits you is the most important thing. But even with those thematic messages in mind, the ending just doesn't work as well for me as the first game. Even though the gameplay, characters, and murders are overall improved, I somehow don't enjoy the sequel much more than the first game overall. This video might feel a bit short, but I do have more to say on Super Danganronpa 2, but it'll have to wait. I'm not done with the franchise yet. To be concluded.